It's hard to think of two things more popular in the world of Subaru than Forester and their new Wilderness line. But for 2025, even though we got an all-new Subaru Forester, the Wilderness was nowhere to be found. Well, it was, but if you wanted a Wilderness, it looked suspiciously like the 24 model with none of the new updates, and that's because it was. But don't worry, that problem has been solved. For 2026, we have the all-new Subaru Forester Wilderness, and not only is it back, but it's better than ever. Something that helps define the Wilderness model is not just the more capability, but also the distinct looks that come along with it. In this case, the accenting color that goes across the entire lineup, which they called anodized copper, and I call it sort of a yellowy gold sort of look. But either way, I like it. And in this case, it's highlighting your tow hook recovery points, which has increased since last year. In this case, we have 2 rather than just the 1. Not only does it help symmetrically even things out, but it's better for doing things like tying down your kayaks, or should you actually end up getting stuck, be a little bit easier to pull out because it should be closer to where you need it to be. We also get more black plastic cladding that you'll find throughout the vehicle, but that's not actually the highlight. The highlight is one you can't see because the Forester Wilderness is all about more capability. And under here, instead of having a plastic cover, which you'll find on pretty much every other vehicle, you do actually have a metal cover for better protection. I don't know if I call it a full skid plate, but it is going to provide more protection for your engine, the most critical component, than you get on other Forester models. This generation of Forester feels boxier and more upright, and honestly a little bit more rugged, which really works for this Wilderness trim, which in and of itself is trying to be a bit more rugged. We'll see some more splashes of that throughout the vehicle, but here, honestly, my favorite pop is going to be in the color. Here in the symmetrical all-wheel drive logo that you'll find across the lineup, this one is going to be highlighted in that anodized copper. You'll also find it up in the roof rails, which are standard and reinforced, and you'll also find it here in the Forester logo. Also, you're going to find it here in the Subaru Wilderness badge, which honestly, as far as badging goes for special trims, this is one of my favorite. It feels like a fun little shield logo that you can put on a ton of branded merch, and I think Subaru already is working on that as well. But it's not just about these accenting pieces and these little pops of color, because you do get more capability with it. Those roof rails, those are reinforced to handle more weight, which means specifically something like your rooftop tent should go up there without any issue. You don't need a full-size truck to be able to do that. You also get more ground clearance, and not that the Forester doesn't get good ground clearance as standard, but at 9.3 inches, not only is this a notable increase there, as demonstrated here by this curb, but it's also just a little bit more than we got in the outgoing model, which was actually the outgoing generation, even though it was 1 year apart, at least as far as the model year looked. There are a fair few off-road and adventure-inspired trims out there in the compact crossover segment, and the first thing that tends to happen is changing of the wheels and or the tires. And in this case, we get both. It's a 17-inch wheel with a matte black finish and definitely an off-road look to it, though my favorite thing is that the matte black actually matches the matte black on the cladding throughout the vehicle. For the tire, we're looking at a Yokohama Geolandar all-terrain, and while this is not going to be a hardcore off-road tire, this is going to be great when you find yourself off the pavement. Enough to be comfortable to drive around in without being too loud or obnoxious, but enough grip that you can handle some more difficult terrain, some more slippery conditions in a much more confidence-inspiring way. And the suspension has also been retuned. Not only is this lifted a little bit, but it's going to be a little bit softer so that when you do find yourself on some gravel roads that aren't as forgiving as your everyday pavement, you're not going to have a broken back by the time you reach your campsite. While there are now a few different powertrain options for the Forester Wilderness, you only get the one. It's the standard 2.5-liter boxer engine making 182 horsepower, 176 pound-feet of torque, and still routed through a CVT transmission. It does have a 7-speed manual mode, but honestly that's not something I've ever played too much with. What you might enjoy though is there is no longer just a sport mode, it's a sport sharp mode. And what that really means is sharper throttle response, which on-road may be a little bit more fun, but off-road is actually going to be helpful dialing power in and out just a little bit. By going with the Wilderness, one thing you get is more functionality, one thing you lose is a little more practicality. That's in your daily driving. You do take a couple mile per gallon fuel economy hit, and that totals out to about 28 highway and 25 city. I would love to see the hybrid powertrain available here, and who knows, in the next couple years they could. And because the Wilderness sells so well for Subaru, I wouldn't be surprised if they're already working on it, but they want to make sure they don't have too many compromises because function really is the focus here, and if you ended up adding too much weight, that might start to change things. And this does end up being lighter than most of the other competitors, or at least competitors in the capability segment. If you shop this versus a Toyota 4Runner, the 4Runner can take you farther, but the question is that farther that you actually want to go, or is it just a little bit overkill? From just about any angle, if you know what a Wilderness model is, you'll be able to identify this pretty quickly. But if you really don't know what it is, the back here is actually going to be the most blatant example of this is a Subaru, this is a Forester Wilderness, and this is what you need to know about it. It starts for me here on the bottom, because not only do we have that black plastic cladding, we also have those anodized accents, but we also have Subaru stamped here in the back, which feels very much truck-like. A lot of mid-size or full-size pickup trucks are doing that stamped look, and we get it here in the plastic. We also get it here in the sheet metal. In this case, it says Forester right under that rear window, which of course does still have a rear wiper, and the washer, which I've been tempted to not use at this point because dirty is kind of the look here. As far as the rest of the badging goes, we do have Subaru Wilderness over on the side, so that's the big obvious one. If you don't know what Wilderness is or what makes this different, that's the logo. And even though this is a totally different rear bumper design, I actually like this one better than we get in the standard models, because the standard models have the exhaust outlet in a spot that looks like there should be two. In this case, it's very clearly just supposed to be one. But don't worry, it's not just the looks, we've got more capability, especially over last year's model where it did have increased towing capability of 3,000 pounds, the 24 model year. In 2026, we're up to 3,500 pounds, and we still have tons of cargo volume. And in this case, it is going to be a power activated lift. When you do so, you are going to be met with about 27 cubic feet of cargo volume. It's going to be a little bit less than you find in other models, but trust me, I have got a lot of stuff in here and have had for a few days, and I have never run out of room. And if I did, if you fold those seats down, not only is this big and square, but it gives you so much more room, almost 70 cubic feet of capacity at that point, and you don't even have to reach in to go ahead and lower those. You just have to pull the lever right here. It's going to be a manual release, obviously a manual lift back up, and by that I mean you're probably going to have to go around. But you also get to play with all the fun accessories that Subaru offers for these rear cargo areas, including things you can hang up here so you can have a little lantern at the campsite. And if you do end up looking under, we have Subaru stamped here with sort of a topographical map design, just a lot of little Easter eggs, but it really feels the part. Up front, these seats are quite comfortable, more comfortable than they actually look like they're going to be, but I also find them pretty well supported. And if you need to make adjustments, those are all going to be power adjustments. Nothing here needs to be done manually, although there is no position memory, and that one does seem like a bit of a bummer. If you want to move that steering wheel, it's a manual adjustment. Flip the switch and move to your heart's desire. I was able to find a nice comfortable seating position. This is sort of a mix between very upright and still stretched out a little bit, because this doesn't end up being super tall. I do still feel like that I'm in my more comfortable position, which is almost a little bit more car-like rather than truck-like. And while this entire interior is animal-free, that's right, animal-free interior, no leather steering wheel, no leather shift knob, all of this being the StarTex material that is not only more water resistant, but also nicer to take a look at than you find in the cloth. And these seats are heated, although unfortunately not ventilated. You also can't get a heated steering wheel here in the Wilderness, and that does feel like something that hopefully in the next couple of years we see changed up. If I sit bolt upright, and I am 6 feet tall and I sit pretty tall, I still end up with about 2.5 to 3 inches of headroom, which is great, especially considering I have an enormous panoramic roof above me, which helps things feel a little bit more airy, even if I do get tight on space, but in this case, not a concern at all. But let's go ahead and hop on the back and see what it's like over there. I have to say, both the front and the back doors open very wide, so getting in and out is super easy. And once you're here in that second row, honestly, it's just about as spacious as it feels up front, though admittedly, we're lacking a little bit on headroom. Like I said, I'm 6 feet tall, I sit very tall, and if I sit bolt upright, I am in the ceiling. Not in a way that I have to start craning my neck, but not in a way that's super comfortable. But if I sit a little bit more normally, just hunched a bit forward, that one leaves me plenty of room. I also have plenty of room when it comes to my legs. This is set behind myself as the driver, and I still have, again, another 3.5 to 4 inches of leg room. So actually, space back here, not bad at all. I'll slide over here so you can see what that looks like a little bit better. This is sitting forward, and this is sitting bolt upright, which is probably not how I would normally sit, but nice to know what you can and can't do in those situations. We do have a center folding armrest with 2 additional cup holders. We have ventilation down here in the center console, USB-C port and a USB-A port, not 2 USB-Cs. I wouldn't mind seeing that change, but I expect we'll see that for a little bit longer. One thing that's missing here though, in my eyes, especially for the price point, ends up being the ability to have heated outboard seating. This is a vehicle you want to take you and your friends around in. If you have kids in car seats, heated seats don't do much for them, but if you have adults back here, then you might want to be a little bit more comfortable. As you might be able to tell, this panoramic moonroof doesn't go all the way back to the rear, but it does still help open things up quite a bit. And if you wanted to actually fit that family in here, the family that you had to go and buckle into car seats, there is a ton of space here. So I think most of your rear-facing child seats would fit here without issue. And you do have anchor points, not only in the outboard seats, but one here in the center. So you could go ahead and do a bit of an offset if you wanted to try and fit some adults around here and put the child seat there in the middle. Let's take a quick look around the interior here of the Forester Wilderness. It's going to look a lot like what you find in the standard Forester, although admittedly with the biggest screens available, including that digital cluster, and some more anodized accents. Not just in the actual plastics that you'll see, but also in the stitching. Obviously not the exact same color, but very, very close. And if you ever forget whether or not you have a Wilderness, go ahead and just check your headrest, Subaru Wilderness embossed right there. But as I mentioned, you'll also get some of that accented stitching. This is all that StarTex material. Perforations-ish, sort of a sketched in design there, but no perforations, no ventilation, and heated seats are really the only sort of feature set you'll find from these seats, especially on the passenger side, which is manual controls, not powered. Over here in the door, you'll find more of that stitching and a fun little tag. I actually really like that little tag. Maybe that's just me, let me know down in the comments, but it just does a really nice job of breaking this space up a little bit. Lots of black in here, but also some sort of lighter black, maybe even gray, just depends on how you want to look at it. We also have plenty of storage here, enough for a large water bottle. And up in the dashboard, we get the same sort of checker design that we find in other Forester models, but again, with that accented stitching here on the top and bottom, and a nice little geographic sort of inlay there just below. Again, just enough to break things up. And if you wanted to look down by your feet, you'll also find a topographical map, or topographical inspired. I'm not sure what that actually might be. I'm sure someone in the comments can tell me what has inspired that. And then in here, a fairly large glove box, plenty of room for storage for things like actual gloves. When it comes to the screens, we've got two. On this side, we've got a 12.3-inch digital gauge cluster. On here, we have, honestly, probably one of the weak points here, and that's going to be the infotainment system. Whether you like vertical or horizontal, that's up to you, but for me, it comes down to some of this actual software. And the graphics on here are a little bit behind. This feels a little bit more 2000s than it feels like it should be, and it's not the fastest response time. Obviously, if I had already clicked the maps earlier, it'd probably jump in a little bit quicker. The home button is going to be located right down here, but I spent most of my time in Android Auto or your Apple CarPlay, whichever you prefer. Although CarPlay is going to have a little bit more functionality when it comes to engaging with that digital gauge cluster. For me, it's still just going to be that Android Auto. Not everything is on the screen, but quite a bit of it is. If you want to go ahead and control the temperature, you have options there manually on the left and right, actual physical switches, although it does have the black shiny plastic that goes around it. You also are going to have more control if you go ahead and click on that function there at the bottom. This is going to bring up not only the temperature, but also your auto, your air recycle, max AC, those sorts of things. But don't worry, defrost is still going to be controlled on the left and the right side. That's forward and rear. We also have our volume knobs on the left and our tuner there on the right. Plus, in the top left corner, that's going to be your emergency flasher. But let's move down beyond that because there are more features to be found. We have a Qi wireless charging mat, currently just holding a cable. That other cable plugged into one of the many charge ports. We have a USB-A, a USB-C, and an auxiliary cable. Not something you're going to find too terribly often these days, but if you want maximum versatility in what you can play in your vehicle, it's nice to have those options. On the left-hand side here, we're going to have a shifter, and that's because this layout has changed just a little bit. Instead of sort of the offset cup holders, we now have vertically mounted cup holders, and honestly, they seem to be working pretty well. I haven't bumped into anything while I've been in here. It also got a little bit smaller for that shift lever, which I really appreciate. It doesn't need to be very big. You do have your park reverse, neutral, and drive, and if you kick it off to the left here, there is a manual mode. Even though this is going to be a CVT, it does have that simulated manual shifting. You can use the paddle shifters on the steering wheel for that function as well. Down below that, we have our park button and our camera views. Go ahead and click that camera button here, and you'll see it pops up fairly quickly, and there are a number that we can choose from. Right now, it's facing forward, but obviously if we kick it in reverse, we've got a backup camera there as well. That forward camera will also come on when you put it in X mode, which you go ahead and activate from the top of that touchscreen. Moving back down though, we have our phone plugged in, just a sort of a preference of mine. And when it's plugged in, there's also a new slot that's just about perfect for a large phone. I've got a Galaxy S23 Ultra, and Ultra still fits without too much issue. If we open up our center console, which has also gotten a little bit bigger, you'll see there's plenty of room for things like those emergency snacks I like to make sure I have tucked around. And tucked just up front here, we have our 12-volt, 120-watt power outlet. When it comes to the driver view, one thing you won't find in the Wilderness is going to be a heads-up display, but the main feature really is, technologically speaking, going to be that 12.3-inch digital cluster. And it's not like there are a ton of things you're going to be doing on here. It doesn't activate a camera when you turn on your turn signals, but it is going to be, I think, almost counterproductive to what we have for the infotainment, because this is nice and crisp and sharp, and it is adjustable, but it makes the other one feel a little bit farther behind. So hopefully it's not too much longer before we see an update on your main infotainment. When it comes to the steering wheel, however, this is going to scream Wilderness with all of this color accenting. But again, I really love not only this color, I'm so done with red as far as the off-road accent color, so go ahead and mix things up, but also with how easy it is to use these buttons. The layout here is nice and simple. On the left-hand side are controls for things like your infotainment. Track forward, backward, volume up and down, answer the phone, hang up, use your voice commands, that sort of thing. On the right-hand side, those controls are going to be for your driver assist. We have our adaptive cruise control, our lane keeping assist, speed up and down. On the right side here, that's your sport, but not just sport, sport sharp, as well as your intelligent driving system. That's your standard mode, basically. Those paddle shifters will be found just behind there. We have a shift up and a shift down, obviously in the left-hand column. Not only your turn signals, but also going to be controls for your headlights. Here on the left-hand side, not too much to be found. You'll notice one button blank, but on the left-hand side, that's going to be the control for the rear hatch, and then obviously dimming and brightening that driver display. Just above the driver's head, we've got our visor. It is going to be a lit vanity mirror there, and it does extend, but not all the way out. It's got a little extended option here. That one, hopefully you're not too tall or just out of reach of that actual coverage. I found myself a couple times getting my eyes shaded, but the rest of my head, not so much. And when it comes to the center console, we do have room for sunglasses, which I certainly appreciate. Controls there for that moonroof. It is going to be a manual opening shade, but then a powered moonroof. We can go ahead and open that up. Nice and large, goes well over the driver's head. And as for other buttons, the controls on the right are going to be for your lights, and on the left-hand side, both SOS and your information key. If you're looking for speed in the Forester Wilderness, downhill is going to be your best friend, because this doesn't get any more power than the standard Forester, and still a little less power than you find over in the hybrid. Is there a hybrid Wilderness on the way? Not so sure. That'd be great, but for the moment, this is what we have. So it's not any quicker, but let me tell you why this is light years ahead of the outgoing Forester Wilderness, because that Wilderness was the last generation's model. Even in 2025, you were actually buying a 24. And there have been a ton of improvements made to this entire vehicle that make it so much more enjoyable to drive day to day and on longer road trips. We have spent quite a bit of time out on the road today, and we've done a lot of miles. And we've been in really windy and loud conditions that haven't really made its way into the cabin here, and that is not something that could be said about Foresters of old. This has gotten a lot more refined, and in the Wilderness trim, you don't lose any of that. Yeah, you can probably hear the tires a little bit more, and that's because they're knobbier tires. It's not going to handle as directly because it is a little bit higher off the ground, and that just means there's going to be a little bit more wobble. But none of this feels like it's a lifted Jeep, and at any point you're in danger of tipping over. And actually I think that's why the Forester does so well and why the Wilderness is ultimately so popular, including amongst people who buy things like Jeeps. Not this model in particular, but Subaru told us that a lot of the Outback Wilderness that they sold had Jeeps as trade-in, and honestly, that makes a ton of sense. If you've taken your vehicle off-road and decided that it's actually way more capable than you need it to be, and the on-road compromises just aren't worth it, this is that pretty perfect middle ground. Let's say you're looking for an adventure this weekend, but it turns out it's about 3 hours away. You know what I don't want to do? Is go drive my Jeep for 3 hours to then go enjoy my Jeep at lower speeds in settings that maybe it's a little bit more built for. This, take it anywhere, do just about anything. And yes, your trail is going to be a little bit more limited, but I mean a little bit more limited. There's not many places I wouldn't be comfortable taking this that I myself wouldn't be uncomfortable driving in the first place. Maybe that's just my off-road comfort, but again, you still have to drive the vehicle home, and you did pay a lot of money for it in the first place. Plus, you're not trying to get an insurance premium because you bashed up your daily driver on the weekend trail. In terms of fuel economy, it'll be just a little bit less than we find in the standard models, and that's because it's the same powertrain, the same engine, the same all-wheel drive system, but a little bit taller, not great for aerodynamics, and obviously a little bit knobbier tire. But let me tell you, when you're out on your trip, you're not really worried about that. You're not gonna have to worry about that because we're not talking about something that's in the high teens or the very low 20s. This is a car that economically can take you where you want to go. And that's pretty much Subaru's slogan, wherever you want to go. If you drive something like this with any regularity, this is a reason to get the Wilderness trim. Not that a Forester can't do this on its own already, but the Wilderness is going to take any of the discomfort that you got in the Forester and diminish it even further. Obviously, something like this doesn't require a lift. What you really just want is a more forgiving suspension, and trust me, we have plenty of that here. The off-road tires are going to make it a little bit grippier. That's always nice because this can get a little bit slick. But if you're in one who loves a good view and are actively in search of it, then this is exactly the car for you. And yes, I am purposely hitting those bumps because in so many other vehicles that you could shop against this, that would be nearly backbreaking. You would not enjoy yourself for a moment. And no, that's not the most comfortable for me either, but you can also hear me just talking right through it. This thing is comfortable, and it actually is going to be more comfortable on-road as well, although not as great at handling on-road. So where you spend most of your drive is probably going to be a determining factor there on which one you want. But when it comes to the right tool for the job, while the Forester is very capable, if this is part of any of your regular driving, a Wilderness is probably going to make you a little bit more comfortable doing it. Not to say you couldn't do it in a standard Forester, but that ground clearance, a little more articulation, certainly a more comfortable suspension, and knowing that you've got a, let's just say, better cooling system for something like your transmission, that's going to make sure that you're not going to get stuck or overheating in a situation like this. Because if you do a lot of this, it's a lot harder on the vehicle, much harder than it is sitting in traffic on a regular basis at least. And that's why this Wilderness does so well, not just in the market, but actually when you take it out in these conditions. Because we've been driving this most of the day in a lot of this. And this is a vehicle, or the situation really, where a lot of people would get really, really fatigued. But this has done a really good job of making everything here pretty comfortable. And actually, having the right tires also makes this a lot more comfortable because even though admittedly this is not my own vehicle, so I'm a little less worried about what happens to the tires, I'm not worried about running out of traction or running out of air. These are going to be the right tire for the job, even when we run into some rockier situations. One of the things you do get exclusive on the Wilderness that you're not going to see, but you're certainly going to feel and appreciate, is going to be X mode. And that's one of the things that's made all of this a lot easier to navigate. Not only does the front camera pop on when you go into X mode, and that's on every single Subaru Forester Wilderness, you also get the software benefits, and a lot of that has to do with the traction management. Right now, I'm basically just crawling up this little hill where there isn't a whole lot of traction. It's using the differential and all the computing power to go ahead and make sure I have what I need to get through this obstacle, and safely, because I do have a passenger and I want to get all of us home, and I think I'm going to be able to do so. They say patience is a virtue, and usually for good reason. If you wanted a Wilderness in 2025 and you pulled the trigger, you really got a 2024. But if you said, hey, I can wait a little bit, I think that has paid off, because this Forester, the 25 and beyond, 26 model year obviously included, are a much nicer experience out on the road. It's quieter, it's more comfortable, it's more insulated. And tinny is not a word I would put anywhere near this vehicle. And having been a Forester owner in the past, unfortunately, that's a word I could use in and out. The only downside with patience is that time goes on, and year over year, cars tend to get more expensive and not less, and that is the case here. $42,035 is the starting price as delivered for a Forester Wilderness. And that is a lot of money, and it's thousands of dollars more than it was in the last year. But keep in mind that not only has the Forester gotten more expensive, and so have most other cars out there, but this is also not a bare bones off-road model. This is just about level, only $1,000 or so less than what you pay for a top-end limited, and that's because this is also feature-rich, not just more capable. If you're looking for a bare bones thrash around the trail, this probably isn't it. But this is designed to do as much as it possibly can, and that's why I think it's so interesting compared to other cars out there. If you look at something like a CR-V or a RAV4, which sells in huge volume, they don't have the same dedication to off-road capability. And if they have all-wheel drive, is it a mechanical all-wheel drive? And that new RAV4, it's gonna have all-wheel drive, but with an electric motor in the back. So a completely disconnected experience and not as much power ability to shift back and forth as you get here. And when you really need it, mechanical all-wheel drive is much more comfortable to drive in, even if technically the other can do it. So do you need more capability? Something like a 4Runner? Well, honestly, that's probably a little bit too much for me. I think something like a Honda Passport lines up really nicely with this, but that is a bigger vehicle. And it does have a very different powertrain. If you like this little boxer engine, then the V6 of the Passport isn't going to be your cup of tea, but it's also not going to be as efficient as we find over here, even though I still would love to see that hybrid model. Let me know what this is missing and what you would shop against it, because again, I think this range is absolutely enormous. Leave that down in the comment section below. If you haven't found us on our podcast, you can find us here on YouTube at the Auto Buyer's Guide Podcast, or Apple Music, or Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you have any other thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns, you know where to leave those. And until next time, I'll see you down the road.